are worth doing because we will not have the materials to even attempt all of them. Greening the grid, just greening the grid and putting up a bunch of wind and solar, that's going to expand the size of the grid by at least half, probably double. EVs would be another doubling. And if you're looking at this on a carbon production transition period, putting up a wind tower, assuming you put it in a place where the wind blows, important detail, obviously has an immediate carbon impact. An EV does not, because an EV draws from the grid in its current form, and for the most part, the processing facilities required to build the EV on the first place are incredibly carbon intensive, and most vehicles running on most grids are going to take in excess of a decade to pay back the carbon debt. Data for heavier equipment, things like semis or forklifts or whatever, it doesn't exist yet because those products don't exist yet, but it's probably 2 to 3 decades.
So what does this mean in terms of when we have to get our energy here in the United States, to obviously deliver freight, to survive? We have such a focus on green transition. We saw we've seen what's happened in Europe. How do we navigate this?
We need to break down through in materials science before we do it at scale for transport. Now, the United States and the Great Plains has the world's best wind zone, and the American Southwest from roughly central California down to central Texas is the second best solar zone. I'm not suggesting we can't do any of it, but I'm suggesting that in a constrained environment where we have to make choices because the inputs are limited, I'm just saying that EVs in their current form will not make the cut.
And you said, obviously, semis take so much more battery power.
Assuming they work,
right?
Which we don't know yet.
Right. Well, we hope to find out this year when
200,000, right? By the end of the year, right? Whew.
Yeah, he's got a big hurdle. Peter, inflation has been a big topic, continues to be a big topic. In a world where globalization is shifting or ending, or we're deglobalizing, whatever the appropriate term is, what does that mean from an inflationary standpoint?
Oh, well, yeah, I got an answer for that. You're not going to like it. Okay, so we've got labor pressure at all points. Chinese manufacturers are going away. German manufacturers are going away. Russian materials are going away. The boomers may be retiring, but the millennials, their kids, are at the height of their consumption, suggesting a return to the inflation that we had in the 70s and 80s. And we need to double the size of the industrial plant at the same time. Every disinflationary trend of the last 75 years has flipped, and every inflationary trend is back all at the same time. We are looking at 9 to 15% inflation for at least the next 5 years. That's hardwired in, that's independent of anything the Fed does. That's just reacting to the strategic overall structural environment. Now, at the end of that 5-year period, if we have succeeded in building out the industrial plant, we go back to a much tamer system that will be lower for longer because the supply chains will be local, the materials processing will be local, and we'll be following our own labor metrics, which will have evolved because we'll have had to do a lot more with AI and a lot more with automation than we currently have, especially as we bring in things like electronics manufacturing. We won't have a choice. If we fail to do that, then the 9 to 15% inflation continues, and we have product shortages. It's, from my point of view, it's a really clear path. Because the alternative is just to go through the worst of it and get none of the benefits.
So you're suggesting what Jay Powell's trying to do right now is just a lost cause?
I hesitate to criticize policymakers, especially when they're in difficult environments. He's using the tools he has to deal with the problem he understands. The issue is where we're moving is not just a problem of demand, it's more of a problem of supply. And until we've built out the replacement supplies, we don't have monetary policy that is capable of dealing with the issue that we're struggling with. He's using the tool that he has, which regulates demand. He's trying to get inflation under control. I understand that because high inflation over a long period of time wrecks productive capacity in the long run. But ultimately, productive capacity is what we have to build out. That is primarily a job for fiscal policy. And on that, we've had 4 presidents in a row who are on fiscal policy. Biden is by far the most pragmatic of the bunch. And while there are a lot of things, especially in energy, that I'm like, that's really a horrible idea. For the first time in 13 years, 14 years now, we actually have a president who's trying to enact policy, which is kind of novel from my point of view. We actually have a guy who's president who actually seems to want to be president for a change. And we are getting bits and pieces of what is adding up to an industrial policy. And I might not agree with all of the pieces of it, I certainly don't. But seeing someone try, I give points for.
So Peter, sort of closing thoughts. I'd like to leave here a little bit more optimistic for the folks that are in the room, that are building the technology around the future of supply chain, future of freight. What should they be thinking about investing in that their businesses can benefit from this shift back to North America? Supply chains?
Well, I mean, if you want to play the political card, start lobbying your Congress people to reform Jones. Because you want to talk about virgin territory that has nothing but upside, that would be it. Number two, we have failed to digitize at the same pace that we have industrialized the world. And anything that makes you more modular and more capable and allows you to adapt more quickly is something I think is going to give an outsized advantage. Because remember, we're not dealing with the old system here of one part comes from Malaysia and one part from China, and it's assembled in Vietnam, and all that intermodal stuff. We're going to have fewer supply chain steps closer to home. And the competitive nature of that is going to be very different from just kind of waiting for it to show up on a dock in Busan and then making the trip and then distribution here. We're going to have the need to do everything that is done in Asia in fewer steps, but right in our own world, is going to be massive. That's not just an issue of capacity increase. That's an awareness of what the cargo is on a micro level within each container, so that anyone can go to anything at any time and find out the best way to route within the system. That's going to require a lot more information tech integrated into the space. And that's one of those things with the early manufacturing already coming back in a very big way. The demand is therefore now. And make sure it's in Spanish as well, because you're going to have to do that on both sides of the borders multiple times for each product set.
And you would also suggest that robotics with that would be robotics automation?
Robotics is potentially part of the solution. I mean, I don't want to micromanage you guys. Excuse me. The problem with robotics is that it's very expensive. The digitization, not so much, but robotics and physical automation is expensive, and it doesn't require you just to pay the money once. You also then have to pay for the programming and the updating of the system. And so when I think of automation and robotics in manufacturing, will that be part of the solution? Yes, but it's not a fix-all, and it won't be for you guys either. But digital awareness of what the cargo is at any time so that anyone can know exactly where the supply chain is would be great. So like, think if one of those big container ships, one of those triple E's, got hit tomorrow off Japan, it would take us months to figure out what was on it. When you're dealing with domestic or North American transport, you're talking primarily trucks and rail. That's a lot smaller of a nibble and a lot better laboratory for figuring out how to digitize the supply chain.
Well, Peter, really appreciate your time today. Everyone, Peter, give Peter a hand. Peter, you have a book out.
I do.
Tell us a little about the book.
The title of the book is The End of the World is Just the Beginning, and it charts the story of how globalization brought us to where we are and how everything, transport included, will reform on the backs end of this transition that we're in the middle of.
Well, I strongly recommend it. It's a fantastic read. Peter, a lot to think about. Appreciate your time today.
Pleasure.